And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
No truer words. Welcome to the Kate Daly Show, final hour on a Friday, and I'm glad you're tuned in. I'm so glad you're tuned in. We have a lot to talk about in this hour, and we have a great guest to do it. I've got investigator Dave, of course, by my side and in studio, and we have F. William Engdahl calling in from Germany, and I'm so pleased to have you on the program.
To be with you.
Absolutely. In fact, let me say, you've written many, many books. And in fact, if people aren't aware of you, you're an award-winning geopolitical analyst, William, and in fact, strategic risk consultant, author, professor, lecturer. You've been researching and writing about the world political scene for more than 30 years. You have various books, so many books to mention. But your newest book is Manifest Destiny, Democracy as Cognitive Dissonance. And you've also been translated into 14 foreign languages, and born in Minnesota, grew up in Texas, also a degree from Princeton, and graduate study in comparative economics at Stockholm. You've worked as an economist and investigative freelance journalist in New York and Europe. And you've also lectured on geopolitics at Beijing, University of Chemical Technology, all kinds of things. I mean, I really could do an hour on your biography. And you know, when you're discussing this, we're going to discuss your book, Manifest Destiny, because you bring up a lot of great information in it, and it's all substantiated information. Anyone can find this, but I love how you've put it together, and you're discussing the CIA and NGOs and how destructive they've become. And so where do you want to start? Because this is truly, I know that you probably had a few comments on what we just talked about in the last hour, and Dave was bringing up the fact that could be a false flag, the poisoning of that agent and his daughter, and it was on mainstream for a blip, but it's but the push was to just say Russia did that. And what is your take on that?
I don't see any way in the world that Russia would do such a thing. They gave him back to the West in a swap with some other spies, East-West swap. Okay. He's not a big asset in terms of Russian secrets or anything. It would be the most stupid thing that Putin could do. And you can accuse Putin of many things, but stupidity is not one of them, I don't think.
Okay.
Especially in matters of intelligence. The nerve agents, first of all, the British government is refusing to cooperate in any kind of serious sharing of information. They could give a partial sample of the nerve agent to the Russians that they could investigate it and determine what it actually is. But suspiciously enough, Theresa May refuses anything. And this lunatic Boris Johnson that's supposed to be a foreign secretary, he looks more like a Muppet.
Like a Muppet.
This is a clown show. It's really tragic. Britain used to have at least a certain quality or standard of statesmanship in their cabinet members, and this is just ridiculous. But I think Theresa May is desperate to try to get some kind of diversion.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. We've been inundated with gun control news over here, and even with the student walkout. And so this has been like 3 weeks of this inundation of news in our nation, but geopolitics have not come up as much, except for, a few things, but it hasn't come up as much in the last, say, month. And so it'd be very interesting to kind of get a capsule of where we're at right now. And where do you think, where are we headed right now? What's happening, and what's the sort of the state of the globe right now, in your estimation?
In my estimation, we're coming into the most dangerous waters in terms of war by miscalculation, nuclear war by miscalculation, that we've been in since the 1950s. And the people around Donald Trump are by no means helping that at all. The ascendancy of Pompeo to become Secretary of State, pushing Tillerson out, and the whole shifts that are going on in the Washington administration right now are preparing, at the very least, for war in the Middle East, war against Iran, against Hezbollah, against Lebanon, and of course Syria. And that will not be a contained war. That is a huge thing. And the escalation against Russia, the fact that Theresa May has been joined now by, however reluctantly, by the governments of France, of Germany, and of the United States, the Trump administration, on this accusation of Russia and the nerve gas agent, doesn't augur well, because there's not a seriousness of proof going on in any of these accusations. The Democratic National Committee, so-called hacking by the Russians, there's not an ounce of proof that any intelligence report has presented on that. It's all smoke and mirrors. And I think this is a Democratic Party cover-up, the Clinton machine trying to cover up the fact that the Foundation Clinton is up to their ears in illegal money laundering. But be that as it may, whatever the reason, the deliberate proof for deeds in international politics seems to have been thrown out the window somewhere along the way. And that's a very dangerous state of affairs when international diplomacy no longer has any criteria of truth.
Okay.
Do you think Russia sees what's coming down the pike? And that's why last couple of weeks ago, Putin gave that incredible speech about their weapons, saying, don't do it, don't do it.
I wrote a book called Full Spectrum Dominance, Totalitarian Democracy in the New World Order. And that book was written in 2009, as I recall. And it leads off with a speech that Putin gave in Munich at the International Security Conference in 2007. At the time, the Bush administration had just announced it was going to put ballistic missile defense installations in Poland and the Czech Republic against Iran and North Korea. And Putin said, this is a joke. This is like using your right arm to scratch your left ear, as we say in Russia. And it's aimed at Russia. It's aimed at knocking out our mutual assured destruction capability, which we have kept since the collapse of the Soviet Union, so that there will be no nuclear confrontation with us. We're defending Russia. And this missile defense is anything but defensive. I've talked to military experts, including the late Colonel Robert Bowman, who was the head of the Reagan Star Wars program back in the 80s. And he said, nuclear missile defense is simply the missing link in a nuclear first strike. So this is what the Trump administration is playing around with. They're not being honest with the American public. They're not being honest with the world about how dangerous this is. But at a certain point, and that's why Putin made the speech he did. And if you read it very carefully, it's extremely, extremely carefully thought out. It's not a macho, saber-rattling speech in the least. It's saying we will be pushed only so far, and if it comes to our national existence, we will go the distance. We are prepared to defend Russia to the death. And if anything you know about Putin, you have to know that he's a Russian nationalist. And that explains a lot about what he's done since he came into office in 1999 and began cleaning up the mess that Boris Yeltsin had made of the country.
Right. All right.
This I cover, by the way, in great depth in the book, the Manifest Destiny book that's just out.
In fact, there's a quote in here. Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell at the time told Army Times in 1991, "Think hard about it. I'm running out of demons. I'm running out of villains. I'm down to Castro and Kim Il-sung." And so, interesting quote. And so that dilemma, you say, was soon to be resolved. In the ability to advance a global agenda, Washington unveiled a dramatic new weapon at the time, fake democracy, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, that would be used to covertly create pro-Washington regimes in strategic parts of the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for just a moment, because this fake democracy, non-governmental organization, if somebody doesn't know what that is, what is that?
This is one of the most skillful and one of the most dangerous weapons that the U.S. intelligence community and State Department have created. Weaponizing human rights, non-government organizations, NGOs, weaponizing pro-democracy NGOs, financing them through they created something during the Reagan administration, the CIA created it, called the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, that sounds very noble and high-purpose.
Doesn't it all?
And that's precisely why they chose the name.
Exactly.
Like the National Endowment for Humanities or whatever. The NED is financed by the U.S. government. The NED, as the man who wrote the law that created the NED in the 80s said, we do what the CIA did 25 years ago, only we do it privately. So it's the privatization of the CIA that the NED is all about. And then they began funding human rights organizations in key countries around the world. Today it's almost every country. And they work together with operations like George Soros' Open Society Foundation.
It's financed by him, correct? Financed by
Well, it's both ways. The money seems to go in every direction. But at the end of the day, it's all one machine, and it's called the weaponization of human rights. I call it the fake democracy machine. And what they've done, well, if I can just jump into it in some detail, what I trace in the book, and this is to my knowledge, and I did a lot of research in preparing the book, the first time all of these threads have been put together in the historical evolution of this as a regime change destabilization operation. Like the CIA used to do it in Iran in the 1950s against Mossadegh and so forth, or against Pinochet in Chile. But then they'd get caught with their hands in the cookie jar, and that would blow back on the U.S. government and so forth. So the idea was to privatize this. So you say, well, it's the National Endowment for Democracy. Oh, gee, but that's a private, well-meaning organization. That's not the U.S. government. Of course it isn't. They get all their money from the U.S. government.
Right,
funded. Their directors, all their key people are interlocked with the U.S. intelligence community. So the first test of this project came at the end of the 1980s. And this was the simultaneous, and I describe this chapter by chapter in the book. It's really fascinating. In 1989, George Bush Sr. and the gang of CIA old boys around him decided to totally bring down the Soviet Union, totally bring down China, and totally bring down Yugoslavia.
We're going to come right back. More on this when we come back, and we'll bring it up to present day as well. On the Kate Daly Show, F. William Engdahl, WilliamEngdahl.com, by the way. F. William Engdahl is the guest. Be right back. Hi there. Welcome back. Kate Daly Show at your service. On a Friday, I've got Investigator Dave with me, of course, because it's Friday. And we also have author F. William Engdahl. You can go to William Engdahl, ENGDAHL.com, and check out his books, his newest book being Manifest Destiny. I think one of the things that this show seeks to do out there in this talk radio conservative land is to out all of the major players that are in the art of the destruction of America and our Constitution, and also what is going on in the world and who those players are. And some of these players like to either wear the clothing of the Conservative Party or the clothing of the Liberal Party. Doesn't really matter, because it's the ousting of those parties. Because typically conservative radio will say, we won't talk about our side, we'll only talk about the other other side. In order to understand what's going on in the world and why we're here at this point in time and what we're dealing with, is you have to understand, or people out there have to understand, that these players that we are talking about in this hour come from both sides of the aisle, and it doesn't matter to them because truly their sights are on the destruction and calling all of that out. And your books do that very, very eloquently, William. I love that. And also, let's dive back into the weaponizing human rights, because people need to understand that even in the simplest layman terms, what those three words mean together. What does that mean?
Weaponizing human rights is one of the most diabolical CIA projects that's developed since with the RAND Corporation and the Albert Einstein Institution and so forth over the last 30 years, since the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy. Mm-hmm. And what it means is, this has gotten very sophisticated. Soros foundations come into a country like, let's say, Hungary, or let's say Egypt, or let's say Ukraine, and they begin funding human rights groups that start holding demonstrations against corruption. That's always an easy thing to target in these countries that are former communist countries, and things are chaotic and whatnot. So the people feel that they're not getting treated fairly, and you get young students going out there that have been previously trained, very, very sophisticated training that they're being given by U.S. State Department cutout agencies like OTPOR in Belgrade in former Yugoslavia, and such things like that. And then they began holding demonstrations. Now, in these organizations, these human rights organizations, pro-democracy, there will be trained sleeper agents who will play the leadership role, and they will be directly in contact with the U.S., usually the U.S. ambassador. In the case of Belgrade, it was U.S. Ambassador Richard Miles. Mm-hmm. And he had a group of specially trained agents coordinating networks of naive students who were convinced they were fighting for a better world. They were fighting for the American way of life. Right. And in Egypt, I talked to students who were demonstrating in Tahrir Square, and they were convinced, they were ready to be put in prison, that they were doing this on behalf of democracy. They were doing it on behalf of the U.S. CIA to topple Mubarak, because Mubarak has become his own entity and was no longer singing to the tune of Washington.
Same thing with Yugoslavia, too. The first successful fake democracy color revolution that you cite is that regime change, right, in 99?
Yeah, against Milosevic. Mm-hmm. And U.S. taxpayers paid for thousands of cans of spray paint and cutouts that were used to spray on the walls all over Serbia. Mm-hmm. The slogan of the clenched fist, this famous clenched fist of the OTPOR NGO that was financed by millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money. So they, Milosevic had survived 4 lost wars, 2 major street uprisings, 78 days of NATO bombing, and a decade of international sanction. But the NGOs were what pulled him down.
Haven't they changed that tune to having kids in the public education system in America walking out for gun control? I mean, isn't it all kind of paid for by a lot of these same groups?
To be honest, I haven't had time to look into the latest lobbying for gun control in the U.S. But in general, I would say yes. It smells like the same, same manipulation. It's manipulation.
Right. Absolutely. All right.
And many of these school shootings are highly suspicious in and of themselves, especially this latest Florida one where the local sheriff seems to have had a very dubious role in that whole business.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when they created these, the idea was to create a U.S. Treasury funded, seemingly private entity, right? This is what you say in your book, that would serve as a conduit for this money. That money funnels through because it's a non-governmental agency. So they get the government, they get our tax dollars. And so this is, as far as what this goes back to the late or early 90s or late 90s in that era. But wow, what they've been able to do with that, if you think about all those groups, Black Lives Matter and all these groups, right, that have been sort of the fruit of that tree that they developed back then. It's been amazing. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
The whole target Wall Street operation had Soros money in it as well.
Yeah.
Jeez, go ahead, Dave.
I know that Putin expelled or attempted to expel all the NGOs from his country at one of his first elections. Have we gone in through a back door? Are there other means of being able to do that?
Right now in Russia, so far as I know, they're having big difficulties. So they're trying to create things like this nerve gas poisoning false flag or nonsense from Theresa May and so forth to demonize Putin and Russia. But it's just, it's getting boring after a certain point.
Well,
these neocons in Washington don't have much creative imagination.
Well, it brings up a good question because this was something that you wrote in your book, and one of the first major targets of the newly created NED and its associated NGOs was democracy promotion, was to push the breakup of the Soviet Union after '89, right? So Washington's goal was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It was to split the Soviet Union into fragments so that we could control the corporations, right? And could loot mass privatizations, correct?
I call it in the book the rape of Russia. And George Bush Sr. and a group of CIA old boys around Bush, the same gang that ran the Iran-Contra criminal enterprise when Bush was vice president, they ran this Yeltsin operation. Yeltsin was an asset of the CIA. He was put in there by a CIA covert operation. His grandstanding, standing on the tank, defying Gorbachev and so forth. This is all staged. This was all theater. And then once Yeltsin got in there, the CIA made sure he had enough vodka to keep him drunk all the time. And the people around him, the oligarchs that became billionaires, were all laundering their billions into dollars through banks that the CIA opened for them in Switzerland and elsewhere. So this is just an unbelievable looting operation.
Wow. So talk to me about shock therapy. George Soros.
Well, there's, of course, the famous version in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of my favorite movies with Jack Nicholson. But the shock therapy that I talk about in the book was something developed by Harvard professor Jeffrey Sachs and was applied first in Poland together with money from George Soros, a good friend of Jeffrey Sachs, and then it later was brought into Russia. And the idea of shock therapy was you don't gradually bring a Soviet centralized state-planned economy into a capitalist free market model. You do it by shock therapy. You do it all at once. You have free prices, you have complete chaos, and inflation goes through the roof. It was horrendous. The unemployment, factories were closing. They couldn't afford to pay their workers. The cost of living was skyrocketing, and that's shock therapy.
Wow.
So once that takes place, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, comes in and says, okay, Poland, you have to privatize all these communist entities that were part of the state under this, communist system was a state system. So you have to privatize it and you have to sell it off on the free market.
Right.
And of course, the only ones who had dollars in those days were Western business interests like George Soros and characters like that who had the inside track.
Wow.
So they came in and began looting the prime assets of these countries. That was shock therapy.
Well, in fact, you talk about Operation Hammer, and you talk about the CIA old boys, Bush's old boys, were ready to launch this next phase. After they were told to take out and get rid of Marcos, they were told to basically and also help Marcos secretly steal the stolen Japanese gold. Yes? Right.
Marcos did that on his own. I think he had some intelligence people who uncovered from Japanese survivors of the war
some
of the drivers. And so he found out where there were some of the caves that the Japanese emperor and the royal family hid the stolen gold from China and Asia and so forth that they had looted.
Okay.
And he began bringing that onto the market. Marcos's only mistake was that he thought he could trust Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi arms dealer, playboy arms dealer. Mm-hmm. But Adnan Khashoggi was an asset of George Bush Sr. and the CIA. So the whole Marcos gold operations, it was, he thought he'd really made the big time, was all known to the CIA, and they simply organized to bring him down. So
that the next phase of the Operation Hammer was the systematic takeover of strategic energy, raw materials, and military state industries in Russia, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, what they did is they brought in a group of Harvard economists under Jeffrey Sachs and CIA assets and so forth. And then this went into the early years of the Clinton administration when Larry Summers was assistant and then later Treasury Secretary. Mm-hmm. Larry Summers, coming from Harvard, brought in a whole crew of people from Harvard to run this Russia operation. They laundered it through Harvard University, this nice-sounding academic, prestigious name. But it was a looting operation. It was a mafia operation.
Jeez.
And so, among other things, the CIA financed, through Operation Hammer, they financed the August 91 generals coup against Gorbachev, where Yeltsin so bravely and courageously stood up on this tank and yelled at the Duma there in the White House in Moscow. And they used their secret war chest to destabilize the ruble. And they used corrupted state bank, national bank officials in the Gosbank to steal the country's gold reserves. And then they began what you mentioned, the strategic energy, raw materials, high-tech state military industries, through the finance minister of Yeltsin, Yegor Gaidar, working with Harvard's Jeffrey Sachs and George Soros.
And his Open Society Foundation that was linked to the CIA by Chinese intelligence, right? And Open Society appears pretty operational. They're busy. Oh my gosh! When we come back, I want to ask you about the PNAC. I think every American, if you don't know what the PNAC is, or the importance of that document that was going to showcase plans. I mean, that really was put out to the public, but the public didn't, I don't think, really latched on the understanding of this. Right before 9/11, we had the PNAC. And it's very interesting on what it was going to attempt to do and the plans it laid out. So when we come back, I want to talk about that with you as well. And we have William Engdahl on the show, WilliamEngdahl.com. Manifest Destiny is the book. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Hi there. Welcome back to the Kate Daly Show. I've got investigator Dave with me, and we also have on author F. William Engdahl, who has written the book Manifest Destiny, amongst many books that he's written, actually. And he's a lecturer, author, and political analyst. And, the PNAC agreement that came out, say, a year before, Bradley Foundation put it out about a year before the 9/11 happened, and it really sort of outlined 9/11 as well, because it called for a new Pearl Harbor to make sure they got a huge military budget that nobody would complain about. And it's so interesting, just even that alone. We could do a whole show with you just on that. But I fear another huge, even bigger 9/11 coming. Do you? because that's the only way to get people emotionally into supporting a war, is something like that.
I fear you may well be right, Kate. The direction of the politics in Washington in the last several years, but certainly since the Trump administration, has been an escalation of provocations, of pushing your opponent in the nose and say, come on, buddy, fight me. This kind of bully tactics. And now it's with these latest nerve gas accusations against Russia and the deceit and deception. The U.S. is not getting out of Syria. The U.S. is going into Syria, working with Israel to, go after the Hezbollah, go after ultimately Lebanon, and go after Iran, and go after the Assad government in Syria.
I have a question about that, though, because in the last 13 months, we haven't seen a coup now, and obviously a replacing, which we like to do in all these countries, of Assad. That gave me some hope, because there wasn't a direct. I could see that ramping up with the Obama administration, but for the last 13 months, we haven't seen that, and so that's given me some hope. Does that give you some hope that we would not go in and take out Assad like we had planned to? We haven't yet under this administration.
They haven't yet. We haven't yet because of the Russian presence primarily, and the air defenses that Russia has given to Damascus, among other things, as well the presence of Iran to a certain degree, the presence of Turkey in a confused way to a certain degree, is changing the whole terrain. It's not about ISIS. The CIA and the Mossad created ISIS along with British intelligence years ago out of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. And they simply morph these things and change the names to suit, the confusion. But it's about dismembering Syria. It's about natural gas pipeline control from the Middle East, from the largest gas field in the world that's shared between Iran and Qatar in the Persian Gulf, North Pars. And it's about dismembering Syria, and that's a long-standing Israeli plan, Israeli intelligence, Mossad and Netanyahu, among other things. And they're using the Kurds as the suckers in the sucker game to be their front people against Assad, and they're arming them to the teeth.
Okay, so go ahead. I have a question. I guess
unbelievable mess.
Okay. When I look at President Trump, I'm seeing some good things come out of this. Whereas we've never had a president that's outed the media, that's wanted to separate from the UN, that's wanted to say that climate change, human-caused climate change, is a hoax, which it is. It's a money funneling scam.
Yeah.
So all of those things have been really great to see, and I haven't seen that from another president, to be fair. Do you feel the role in this? Because even with Reagan, he had a lot of people under him too that were sort of hijacking things and doing what they wanted. Paul Craig Roberts talks a lot about that, and the fact that Reagan didn't know what was going on in some of those aspects. But the things that Trump has done have been pretty good. As far as what you're talking about, when you talk about the administration as a whole, are we talking about? You might want to clarify that for people that have that have liked what they've seen from Trump, because it's been pretty unusual. Yet, how does that play out in geopolitics? And who's running this really? I mean, who's behind this?
Who's running this really are the deep state behind the scenes. I think most of the things that you and I would agree on that are positive from Trump so far, the climate change rejection and so forth, are to throw a carrot to his blue collar or his main hardcore constituency, voter constituency, because what he's doing on foreign policy is so useful to the deep state that put him in there that they want to keep him as a live option for re-election. Trump himself, I don't think, makes policy. He has advisors around him, and he has got reactions to things like global warming or the United Nations. But these are the common themes that many Americans share. Against the global only and more protecting for American jobs. But it's all being done with kind of a spin. And the spin is begin destabilizing China, begin destabilizing Germany and the European Union, keep all your opponents off balance. And that's not a very healthy basis for the world's great superpower to conduct foreign policy.
Okay. The PNAC, I want to get to that before we end this. The PNAC was written from a Washington think tank, and it had a lot of players in it. Everybody from, you name it. Was there anybody not involved in this document from both sides of the aisle? And they had some goals. The PNAC put it out there. This was a year before 9/11, calling for a Pearl Harbor to get everybody to write a blank check for the military, but also remove Saddam Hussein, deploy global missile defense, control space and cyberspace, and create a new military service with the mission of space control, exploit the Pentagon's revolution in military affairs. They laid out their own plan. They laid this out for people to view. I mean, it's almost like in your face. I mean, the deep state is interesting how it operates, through these people that wrote this. And that it's very blatant. You can get a huge idea of what they wanted to do. How far have we come since they, and I don't say that in a good way, since the writing of this and since they basically put this together?
Extremely far. Every point you mentioned is today operational, and all the key cabinet positions in the W. Bush presidency were members of the PNAC. The Rumsfeld, Cheney.
Even Biden, on both sides. On both sides of the aisle, you had individuals on this. And
neocon.
Yeah, and then absolutely. And then how far did Obama's presidency further this plan?
Pretty far. Yeah. I mean, there's institutional continuity that's above and beyond rhetoric from a Democrat or a Republican president ever since the assassination of Kennedy in the 60s. And Obama, it's on nuances maybe that Obama was a little bit different from Trump and certain things like pushing for the Iran deal for geopolitical reasons, but and Obama had big tensions with Netanyahu and Israel, but the overall agenda is geopolitically the same, full spectrum dominance.
I guess.
Go ahead.
I guess one of the bottom questions is Trump's participation or role in this. Some people think that many things are going on beyond his reach. And others think that no, it's going on because of him.
Right. And which I don't believe that. I think that these players have been in a long time, and I don't know. I haven't seen that evidence.
I agree with you, Kate. Donald Trump has no depth of knowledge in terms of international affairs, in terms of geopolitics, balance of power. He has people like Henry Kissinger who drops in from time to time and whispers in his ear, but you don't know if it goes in one ear and comes out the other.
So those political
alliances.
He has
no depth of history. He has no... we used to have presidents who
they came from this world.
Had people like Roosevelt, and I am by no means a fan of Franklin Roosevelt, but he was knowledgeable in history. You had people John Kennedy. He was a deep thinker.
Right. But they were also, but William, wouldn't you say they were also deep in that political world before going in as president, whereas we have a businessman as president. So when I look at Trump, I think he does things from a business standpoint, and I can understand that because that's his playing field. I mean, that's, I get it.
Yeah, but is that adequate to be the leader of the greatest nation in the world? I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say no, that is not
that you need
these
understandings. Well, what would Hillary have brought us to by now, do you think? Would we have already seen Assad ousted? Would we have already seen these things in play? I mean, it's just a question because I think people go...
It's hard to say. It's very hard to say because there is very little difference, I think, between the policies of Hillary Clinton or the people around Trump. It's the same deep state. That's the point I want to make.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there are nuances. There may be things that Trump tweets on his Twitter, or shouts out and so forth. But the real thing you have to look at is the motion of the feet in Washington, and the motion of the feet are moving toward a very ugly confrontation with Russia, which is a very sophisticated nuclear power, confrontation with China, which is becoming a very sophisticated nuclear power, and that Russia and China are cooperating very closely for obvious reasons, because we in the U.S. and in NATO have forced them to collaborate for self-survival. Yeah. It's the most stupid thing you can imagine, if you want.
Well, I can certainly understand that. And yes, the deep state players are always thick, and they're always there, and they're not going anywhere. And so what can we do? What could we possibly do as a people to correct this, to get this back? I'm so afraid that we lose our Constitution completely.
I kind of agree. I've just in watching geopolitics for a while, I'm kind of an opinion that the deep state is starting to crumble. And
I don't see that.
I know, but they're starting to lose financial backing and everything else. And as the last gasp, they may go to war.
What do you think, William?
I think much as Dave says, that they're becoming increasingly desperate. They look like they're standing from a standpoint of power. But what they're doing in Asia, what they're doing in much of the world is not from a position of strength. It's from a position of desperation. They're losing power everywhere.
So that's good news.
Well, it's good in a way because their last gasp, their last straw is war.
Right.
And that's bad.
Yes, but the Putin March first speech, I think, caught them a little bit by surprise. They tried to downplay it and say, oh, this is election propaganda. It's not. I know the Russians. They don't do this kind of thing as propaganda.
Right.
This was a clear message. Don't play games with us. Don't play games with us. If you want to have honest differences of opinion about world diplomacy, let's sit down at a table and talk about it.
Right.
But don't do this nonsense with the fake sanctions and the the hacking of the Democratic National Committee nonsense, and so it's all fake.
That it could be crumbling a little bit. The desperation does make me happy. It makes me smile today on a Friday, so that's good. And but who knows? In desperation, sometimes really stupid things are done. So there's a lot of understanding there that things can get a little out of hand, obviously. And when I say little, I'm being facetious. But the book is Manifest Destiny. The author is F. William Engdahl. You can go to williamengdahl.com. He's also on Twitter. And so appreciate you coming on and sharing your views. It's always enlightening. Thank you.
Kate, it was great talking with you and with you, Dave, as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great talking.
Have a great night. It's like midnight there, so we'll let him off the hook. And appreciate him coming on. Be faithful, be fearless. This is the Kate Daly Show. See you back here on Monday.